Right, so here we have that sand jar from the clay experiment. As you can see, we have these little rocks. I'll grab a couple of them. Firstly, we can see we have these little rocks in here. And we also have this sand. Now, if you look at this sand, it looks like beach sand. It looks just like the stuff that you have at most beaches. Now, of course, it's differently colored. I can see reddy, more like you've got some reddiness and you've got some kind of paleness and some orangeness. So it spans between the colors of white and kind of an orange and red. Not really, like more like a deep orange, I guess, but the deep orange transitions, I guess it would transition into a red. And you have some black kind of impurities, which is just, I think, plant material like bark or something. But really, yeah, you can see this, when you take away the clay, it really becomes a kind of like a beach sand. And here we have the other bucket of stuff, and this is less refined. It still has some of the dirt in it. As you can see, it's more of a browny color, so it's still got that clayey kind of oily, material stuff, which is the dead organic, or not the, it's kind of dead but living, so to speak. It's a processed organic matter. Here I have just a pot over here, and you can see this moss on the top, so you can see the moss is growing out of the dirt. If I take a sample of the dirt, you can see it's dirt. It's got the sand in it. You can kind of see some white, if I can get this, yeah, the white crystally stuff. I think it's like a combination of silicate kind of crystals and iron based crystals. And you can see on the top, this bit here, you got the it's transitioning from the dirt, the lower earth realm, into the middle realm of greenery, which that little piece of grass and these little tiny bits of grass and moss and whatever, and you've got this, all this greenery here. So that's the transition from the lower earth realm into the middle plant realm. Here, of course, we have the clay that was extracted. Still waiting for a good time to do something with it, and as we can see, it is the oil. It's very much an oily substance. It's a combination of an earth and a water, but it is basically the kind of really what it kind of looks like is shit, excrement, poop. It's basically earth poop, and what I'm going to kind of talk about and analyze is that I think the idea of fertilizing a field with shit, with waste, or with processed food scraps through what do you call composting, is essentially you're getting like worms, to process, or you're getting the earth, or you're getting something else to act as like a digestive system to turn the food waste into its organic, pure form, which is this resinous, oily kind of browny. It's got like, I don't know, maybe some greeny tones into it which is like this clay stuff. So we'll talk about more of that on the whiteboard.
Alright, so imagine we were trying to process organic materials into some kind of fertilizer for a field or a farm or land, or even like a lake or a basin. We would want firstly organic materials. So usually, if this was the earth and this is the sky, we want things above the earth. And the things you have above the earth is usually plants down here and animals. So a combination of these things are used in vaguely earth materials. So again, vaguely earths can also be used. So this is kind of your three primes of animal, vegetable and mineral. Now these two things what happens is, you have things like composting, for example, which is, let's just say you have a space, you have a bunch of food scraps, and you have some worms, and the worms are eating it. If we look at you might go microscopic on the worm. It's eating the food and it goes in its digestive tract and it poops it out, right? And you have lots of worms doing this, and they start to convert, let's just say, a potato, right? The potato, through the power of the worm or some kind of animal, or or even the earth just through rotting. So we also have the earth, we also have bacteria. You've got water. These are all mediums of transmutation for these things, even the earths, to be honest, to convert it into a kind of like a prime material. As we can see here, we all know what this is. So yeah, what happens is you are converting the higher sky level things downwards back to the middle level, or the plane of existence, which is where the grass grows and the plants grow and all that kind of stuff. You're transmuting it back down. Similarly, with the whole transmutation of the earth layers, that converts it upwards, from the rock. Look like a rock. Here we go. From the rock into the sand, the rock into sand, into clay, into again soil. So I guess we could just have soil here. So these things both, you have this like upward and downward transmutation into this plane, the middle plane of existence, which is where organic things grow from, so to speak. Potentially you also have a downward transmutation. You would have some areas would have a higher one, and some areas would have a lower one, depending on the moisture content, the temperature, etc., etc. But this is kind of like a soil, or I should do a clay and bacterial you can read all this. Bacterial, I don't know, byproducts. Bacteria is interesting because it is the mediator between the elements. The mediator between the rock and the sand, and the sand and the clay, and the clay and the soil, of course, is water and heat and temperature, but it could also be bacteria. For example, minerals or rocks in a lake can be transmuted to a kind of like a powdery form, or suspended in water. When you have like the water and you have stuff suspended in there, it forms this kind of milky thing, and you've got a deep layer of earth and earthly stuff at the bottom. Through the middle, the middle point here can be bacteria, and of course, heat, pressure, water, air, potentially some kind of electromagnetic phenomena. Could be directing, the flow up or down. I'm not sure. I don't know about that yet. So assumingly we wanted to terraform, let's assume that Mars is a rock and it's not a star. Whether it is a star or rock, I really don't know, but we'll know one day. Let's assume you've got Mars here, and you want to terraform it. you want to have the atmosphere, right? So what you could do is you could put tons of organically processed byproduct materials, essentially rotten foods, waste, urine, etc., and certain organic chemicals that would be good, that process into like nitrogenous chemicals, ammonia based, methane kind of, well, I mean, they convert methane to ammonia, so kind of like an ammonium carbonate maybe, potentially, and you put that kind of like on the soil, maybe you just kind of fill the soil full of that. And you probably want water pools as well, water there as well, and you want areas of shade, so you put, I don't know, some kind of structure that creates some shade, and it's kind of like that. So the same way if you're in the desert, how do you convert the desert into a wonderland of like a forest or something? Well, again, you want that shade. You want pools of water, or a river or something. We put a river running through now. Put a river, or we put like a basin or something, right? And we want lots of this organic stuff, because the sand. Remember how I had that little video at the start with all the sand. The sand was like the beach sand, like the desert sand, that kind of collection of sand. And from the sand we have, also we have the clay. So you mix the clay back into the sand. You do that, right? Make a little field in the field of clay stuff next to the river, which has also got the shade. Maybe you probably put the shade over here. I don't know. You don't want that. You don't want your water evaporating. Maybe you probably put the shade over the organic material as well, because ideally you'd want a plant which provides that shade, if you know what I mean. And then you start planting things. Here's your little lettuces or cabbages or whatever, and who knows, maybe you can terraform the desert through using a combination of water, organic, reactive byproduct type things, clay, waste, etc., and shades. That's kind of how I would think about it. And eventually, of course, potentially, would this make like atmosphere? Maybe, because you got to think of it as spiritualization of that. Would and the water, the spiritual. Here we go, water pool here. Spiritualization of the water, the evaporation. You need a lot of water. You need a lot of it probably, but who knows? Maybe that would eventually terraform it. This is one idea at least. Okay, on to the next video. Alright, so let's go through some Wikipedia pages on clay and such, just to get a more scientific and a broader idea about these things. Clay mineral. So here we go. It says clay minerals are hydrous aluminum phyllosilicates. So I looked up earlier, and it says with some variable amounts of iron, magnesium, alkali metals, alkali earths, and other cations found. Alright, so I looked up earlier, and apparently clay is made from the chemical reaction between water and silica type minerals. So sand essentially, or maybe whatever else there is there. So I had that idea where the rocks form into the sand forms into the clay, and the clay forms into the soil, and continuing on, the soil forms into the plants somehow form into the animals, and the animals form into spiritual life forms, so to speak. That's kind of a classic alchemical idea, with some new additions. So one of the main things is silicates, really, but aluminum silicates. And if we look into the here I've got a page about the abundance of abundance of elements in Earth's crust, as we see here. First is oxygen, interesting, and then we have silicon, and then aluminum, and then iron. Oops, try to get that down. Iron, which is kind of what you'd expect. Calcium, again, you've got a lot of calcite, limestone deposits. Sodium, again, you've got sodium based deposits of sodium carbonate, sodium whatever, this and that. So this is kind of what you'd expect, but you can see that I really don't. I have to research the oxygen. I don't know much about that, but definitely the silicon, as we can see, it's 28%. Then aluminium is 8%. So 36% is silicon, aluminum based kind of things, or silicon things, and aluminum things, and then 46, quite a lot, is the oxygen. So that's very interesting, as we can see that a vast majority of the soil is that. Now here we go. Soil, earth dirt, is a mixture of organic matter, minerals, gases, interesting, liquids and organisms that together support life. And if we go down, I believe they have a nice little diagram here. So it says components of a silt loam soil by percentage volume: water 25%, gases 25%, sand 18%, silt 18%, clay 9%, and organic matter 5%. Now silt, I looked up silt, it's basically just like more granular clay. Silt is a granular material of a size difference between sand and clay, so it's a mediator between sand and clay, and mostly of broken quartz. Again, sand, if we look at sand, silt maker is a soil often mixed with sand or clay, or is a sediment mixed in super suspension in water, which kind of means like mixed in with the water. Here we go to sand. Granular material composed of finely divided rock. Here we go. So we went from rock and mineral particle. Cool. So you can see again, from the rock comes the sand, comes the silt, or you can just kind of ignore the silt. That's a mediator between the sand and the clay. So I guess as the sand is breaking up into more small particles, and then eventually the small particles kind of form into the clay. Now what I think the mediator between all of these is bacteria. Here we go. Clay minerals form in the presence of water and have been important to life, and many theorists of abiogenesis involve them. So really water is the key, and of course underground you could, of course, as we saw, the 25% air. Water can be carried in the air. You can have a moist air, so it doesn't have to be a lake bed, but a lake is always the it's a pool of life essentially. A basin of water, for example, is full of bacteria, that mediator, and I believe the bacteria is kind of the mediator between the elements. So the water and the earth, the mediator is that bacteria. It's basically just a organic living processing thing, like a chemical processing. Like it's kind of like the way I see bacteria, it's basically just organic chemical reactions, you could say. Anyway, so we got the idea of clay, we got the idea of sand, and as we saw, sand came from the rock. And here we go. Composition of sand varies, yep. So as we see here, I'll click on this. These are different forms of sand. Now you saw the one that I had looked more like this one up here. You can see this is kind of like a crystal shop. These are all look like crystals from a crystal shop. Here it's probably more of an iron, maybe an iron, because it's green. I imagine most of these are actually iron. It's iron in different forms. This one's a more sulfate, like an iron sulfate. These white things are quartz. These milky things are calcium, so calcite based things, and the really red ones are probably iron. I can't identify all of them, but that's kind of what it is. So go to more pictures. Not a great picture. coral sand. That's kind of nice, that orange. Here we go. These are grains of quartz with a hematite coating. Ferrous what would you call it? Ferrous oxide. So potentially a lot of the oxygen is oxygen based in the Earth's crust, that is, as we have with our periodic table. Oxygen, potentially it's oxide based components, I would imagine. Uranium we don't need. Now if we look at the periodic table, of course we have carbon here, and you see everything in the lines vaguely related. Helium, neon, argon, krypton, etc., xenon. These are all gases. They're all kind of similar because they're in a line. That's how you can understand the periodic table a bit more. Similarly, all the yellow ones similar, all the blue ones. These are all like metals: nickel, cobalt, copper, zinc, etc. Though there are things like lead, tin, etc. There are these metalloids. I think I believe we call them metalloids in there, and of course we have common things like hydrogen, lithium, sodium, potassium, etc. So salts, that kind of stuff. But the interesting thing is we have silicon here, and we have aluminium there. So chemically, 13, 14, very similar. One atom difference, and we have in the line we have carbon, which is carbon's kind of thought of as that physical form of life. It's a representation of the earth element. It seems like all of the ones in this category are a representation of the earth element to a nice phosphorus. It seems like the ones in this category are very much a representation of the earth element. If we look forward, germanium, tin. Now the interesting one is lead. Lead, of course, relates to Saturn, the earth element again. So again, silicon. So all these things are kind of like prime materials, so to speak, prime materials of the physical structures of life. Clay, a lot of clay. Carbon, a lot of carbon with organic things. An interesting thing, nitrogen is related to the air element. Phosphorus, kind of rational reason that's like another air element. It's a higher form, who knows. So that'd be interesting if you were playing again arsenic, the properties of that, antimony. These are very alchemically, the alchemists love arsenic and antimony, and bismuth as well. So potentially these are related to kind of like the air element. Oxygen, sulfur. Now this is an interesting one. Oxygen is related to the fire element. You'd think it'd be related to the air element, but it's actually related to the fire element. Sulfur is also, it's kind of like a crude physical form of fire. They relate sulfur a lot to fire because it is very volatile, it is very flammable. Within reason, it is very energetic. It's sulfuric acid is held as the related to the green dragon. Of course, that's iron, sulfate, and all that. But they would kind of see it as those things. So if you looked at, maybe if you're a scientist looking at tellurium or selenium, if you could get that, you could then again relate those to the air. The fire and fluorine. I don't know. Chlorine may be related to the water. Bromine, again, iodine is in the sea, and chlorine, salts in the sea, fluorine, salt. These are all kind of salt related, or some of them are. So you kind of got your earth, air, fire, and water, and neon, again, helium, neon, argon, krypton. Vaguely related to ether. You kind of think the higher atmospheres of the world is these noble gases. This category, boron, aluminium, gallium, indium, thallium. I'm not sure. I really don't know. I don't know much about boron, to be honest. I do know it's a good supplement for your reproductive organs and such. So there's an aluminium. It's a mental kind of related to mercury, so to speak. So that's a little bit on the periodic table. So what else do we have? Here we're in smectite. So this is where they say a lot of the clay. It's kind of this thing. It's here we go. Can often contain secondary minerals such as quartz and silica and calcite. So again, calcium oxide based mineral and quartz silicon oxide based mineral. So yes, they say a lot of clay can be made from these kind of rocks, for example. And what else do we have? I think that's about it for this segment, and now I'll take it to the whiteboard. Alright, so here we are at the whiteboard. And again, we have our layers. We have our rock layer here. We have our sand layer here. And we have our clay and our dirt and our kind of organic, just say, or we'll just do vegetable kingdom, which is like grass, mushrooms, all that kind of stuff. If we did want to continue the layers, it would go animal and spiritual being, not like spirit energy. I mean, you can vaguely, it's like the upper atmosphere, the realm of spirit, all that stuff. So through kind of the interaction between you have like earth and water, symbol, earth and water, or you can use the downward triangle, whatever you want. Through this interaction between these, we have in the middle is the bacteria, which is kind of just like an organic chemical reaction, and in between it starts to form like a clay. I mean, like a smaller version of the earth. It mixes in with the water, it makes it smaller and smaller. Rock is big, forms into smaller sand, sand is smaller clay or silt, and then clay is smaller dirt. And then it kind of changes a bit because it goes up again, and as it starts to go, this is the earth, this is the sky. You start to get formations of physical things again. So it's very dense, and it slowly gets less dense and less dense, and then it gets dense again, and it slowly gets less dense when it gets to the sky. So you get your little plants or whatever, and then that's like a solid physical form. And then the sky is a non-physical form, so it's like this wave pattern, so to speak, of density. And that's one way to think about it. Yeah, I guess really clay seems to be some kind of like a prime matter, so to speak. Of course, carbon they call it, and they also call that a prime matter as well, because if you burn most things, organic things at least, it turns into carbon. But then if you burn, assumably if you burn most earthly things, it'll turn into silicon-based components, which is interesting. And then the sky, who knows? I guess you would freeze the sky. You would freeze it and convert it to, 70% nitrogen or something. So you've got these things. You've got kind of like a nitrogen, carbon, what's the wrong one? Silicon thingo going on, which is interesting. And then you have these mediators, which is silicon, and then you also have oxygen. So it's multiple different kind of components. I guess you could add aluminium there if you want. But it's interesting because it relates to the idea of carbon-based life, silicon-based life. And I've always thought, well, one interesting thing is that silicon-based life is most artificial body-based things they can be made from silicon. So you can have silicon ceramic, silicon skin. You can have silicon cords, I imagine. for like tendon cords and probably muscle space out of that. Of course, people make them out of like metal and like metal bones for robot arms and all that stuff. But that's an interesting idea. Of course, it's also possible that some people say we can humans can kind of transform or transmute into like a silicon-based body, something. Who knows? Does that mean you could transmute into like a nitrogen-based body or an oxygen-based, or is that what the upper realms are? Or noble gas, maybe? Is that like the mediator or the body of a spiritual being? Are we capturing spiritual beings and using them to fuel our shop lights, those ones, the cool looking ones, different colours? I don't know. I hope not. It's kind of weird. I don't know. I'm kind of out of ideas, to be honest. I hope you got the. Hope you found this as interesting, and I hope it stimulated your thoughts. Anyway, of course, check the link in the description if you're interested, and of course, have a nice day.